Hi, good evening, guys. Welcome to the Early Show with Lata Srinivasan. And of course, it is a Thursday evening. And I have a super duper guest. Hi, Sonal. A friend of mine has joined. He is one of the most renowned authors in India. He's changed the book publishing industry in India. And I think he's, revived Indian culture in so many ways. The books that he's written, which have got so many fans, thousands and thousands of fans, and it's amazing. And I think it's renewed our interest also in traditional mythology. Hi, Lena from Indonesia, my dear friend. So it's renewed our interest in Indian mythology, and I think that's fantastic. As readers, we yearn, for new topics, but I think Indian tradition has so much, our culture has so much, and Amish Tripathi has been able to, help us revive that. Hi, Mr. Surendran. He's brought it back to the forefront, and I think that's wonderful. Of course, he's an award-winning author. He's written the Shiva trilogy, the Ramchandra trilogy. Hi, Priyadarshini. And we're waiting, for his next book. So he's going to tell us, Amish ji has come. Let me just go live. He was also voted as one of the most powerful people, the top 50 powerful people in India by India Today in 2019.
Yeah.
Hi, Amishi. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Thank you so much for joining me from London.
So this thing is in place. I don't have one of those, those phone holders. So I put it on a bunch of books.
I've done the same jugaad. Don't worry about it.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Super. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you so much for joining me from London, where you're now a diplomat, the director of the Nehru Center. So tell us a little bit about that. Are you enjoying the new role? Are you enjoying living in the UK?
I'm stuck here doing the Corona pandemic. What do you think? It is genuinely a multicultural city. London is a wonderful place to be.
Yeah.
I've been here just some 5-6 months. Regrettably, I came at a time like this. So my first few months out here were in winter. And as you know, in winter, the sun sets by, I think by 3:34.
Right.
And it doesn't rise before 8:39. I'm an Indian. I'm used to the sun.
Yeah.
It's disturbing. Where the hell is the sun? And just when summer was starting, the corona, China decided to export the pandemic all over the world. So that makes things a little challenging, but it's a wonderful city, man.
Yeah.
And genuinely multicultural, um, diverse. You get exposed to so many different cultures. It's a great place to be.
Yeah. So how are you enjoying the new role as a diplomat? Is that exciting for you too?
The best part about it is the diplomatic passport, man.
Yeah.
That is like too cool. Yeah. So, one just smoothly slips through immigration. One can go to any country outside of the US with a visa, but I have a US visa. Not that anyone can travel right now.
Yeah.
And the center itself, has wonderful history. It's been around for many decades. It is India's premier cultural center anywhere in the world. And we have our own, heritage building right here in the heart of the city in Mayfair, walking distance from Hyde Park.
Yeah.
The house is also out here. London is one of the key cultural hotspots if you want to make, if you want to influence cultural memes or global culture. The Anglosphere is hugely influential culturally across the world. And by the Anglosphere, I mean UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They have an outsized influence culturally
Right.
across the world. And the cultural needs of these uh, five countries, this Anglosphere, is primarily defined in three cities: London, New York, and LA. DC is very important, politically, Washington DC, but it's not that important culturally. New York and LA have far greater cultural heft. And London, of course, is one of those three. So if you can influence London culturally, you can have massive influence across the world, and that is the aim that the Indian government has, and which I'm very happy and proud and privileged to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're also busy working on your next book, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So can you
I do very little besides work.
can you tell us about the fourth book in the Ramchandra series? I think people want to know about that. I see a lot of questions.
Right, I'm writing it. It is the fourth book of the Ramchandra series. The working title is War of Lanka, and it's a working title. The marketing team will decide what the final will
Sorry.
be. Hi, Fatima. As you know, the first three books of the Ramchandra series were in a multi-linear narrative. So the first book, Ram Sign of Ikshvaku, was from the birth of Lord Ram to the kidnapping of Lady Sita. The second book, Sita, Warrior of Mithila, from her birth to her kidnapping. And the third book, Ravan, Enemy of
Ravan.
Iron, from his birth to the time he kidnapped Lady Sita. And the fourth book onwards is Common Cycle. So I'm writing the fourth book right now, which will be from the kidnapping of Goddess Sita to the death of Ravan. And it's tentatively called War of Lanka. That's what I'm writing right now. I can't tell you anything more because then आप किताब में क्या पढ़ेंगे? What is in the books?
But when is it likely to come out? People want to know that.
Yeah, on average, it takes me, Jatin Singh is saying, I just love you. Okay, thank you, Jatin. But I'm sure what you love are actually my books. I'm sure you don't love me, you just love my books. Where was I on?
How long it takes you to write the book?
Yes. Look, on average, it takes me a year and a half to 2 years between books, on average. So expect that same gap here for War of Lanka. So I'm working hard at it, on the weekends and whatever free time I have.
Okay, so that's great. I think we're really looking forward to that. So stepping back a little bit, you were, I read a couple of interviews that you did recently, and you spoke about Bharat Varsha, Indian culture, and how India can be a model country. Can you just elaborate on that a little? Because I found it very interesting.
I should expand on that a bit because when I was saying that, I was also referring to our ancient culture. I think we modern Indians ourselves can learn first from our ancient culture. There are many things we get right in modern India. I won't deny that. I'm very proud of it. But there are many things that we have to improve. The way women are treated, for example. The way modern India, and let's be honest, it's not governmental oppression, it's societal oppression. Society itself treats, and this is true across all communities, treats women badly, and which our ancestors would frankly be embarrassed by. They would, because our ancestors were extremely liberal when it came to, women and equality between men and women. Our ancestors had very liberal attitudes to LGBTs, to freedom of expression. Our ancestors were obsessed with knowledge. I've written a lot of this in Immortal India. But our ancestors weren't the kind of pusillanimous liberal that one sees in some parts these days. Like we weren't the California type liberal, we were the New York type liberal. We were liberal but tough, right? And that's a model I think we can learn from. We Indians will ourselves benefit. Because if we can, if you see the conversations that are happening in today's day, see the protests that are happening, a lot of it is, there's a lack of a sense of balance in the world. You know, like for example, like let me just speak of one paradigm. You know, the paradigm between liberalism and tradition. You know, we are told that you can either be liberal or traditional. You can't be both, right? And you find that liberals who in the West, and you see it so much in the West, who have abandoned all traditions, it leads to loneliness. Right? There's an epidemic of loneliness across the West. And you find some countries which are so traditional that there's no space for a liberal approach to women or a liberal approach to LGBT rights. In the ancient Indian way, we can be both traditional and liberal. We can have the sense of community, the strength that comes with traditions, but we can also have the benefits of liberalism, of equality between the sexes, of openness. So this is just one example of how we can benefit from our ancient culture. So we should revive it. It's for our own good, and we should try and spread it across the world as well.
Right. Also, I think, when you're speaking about traditional and liberal, it's not versus. You can actually combine the two and get a balance of things. And you spoke about, all the protests which are happening around the world right now. I think also it's people, are fighting for a place for themselves, right? The way I see it, when you talk about Black Lives Matter and then you have All Lives Matter, and at the end of the day, I think each community is trying to fight for a place for themselves in the world. But there is a place, and somehow, the equation seems to have. There's an imbalance in that equation, and why we have all these protests going on. I mean, that's my perspective. But don't you think that, like you were talking about ancient India, things were far more simpler in ancient India than it is in modern India today? I mean, there was much more balance. People were more accepting than they are today.
Uh, there are many positive things in ancient India which we can learn from, but let's be fair, the modern world is far more complex as well. I am not saying that our ancestors had all the answers, but I'm saying the attitudes that they blessed us with can help us find answers today as well. And I think if we have to get one key learning from our ancestors, it's the ability to see that divinity is in balance. Any form of extremism is not good. So, should communities fight for their own rights? Of course, they should. But if that leads to hatred for others, that serves no purpose. As Gautam Buddha, hatred is a bit like holding a burning coal in your hand with the hope that the one you hate will come sometime and you throw it at him. But in the meantime, you're burning your own hand. So you have to have strength. But how do you not tip over into hatred which hurts you only? So, then how to find that balance? That attitude is something that I think we can learn from our ancestors. Having said that, there's a lot of knowledge we can learn as well. Yoga and COVID is what? It's essentially a respiratory disease. Prana is what? It's essentially breathing exercises to strengthen your respiratory system. Can be one of the best ways to strengthen yourself for COVID. Ayurveda is a much more balanced approach to medicine. It could add some value to Western medicine. Western medicine is fantastic at managing a crisis, but often Western medicine works only once a crisis comes. It doesn't do crisis prevention, right? Which is usually you'll notice Western medicine usually messes up your immune system, usually, right? Because the approach is about handling a crisis and handling that specific problem, not at it in a holistic perspective.
Holistic.
Whereas Ayurveda is always about looking at you holistically. Ayurveda always strengthens your immune system. So Ayurveda can be fantastic pre-crisis. Okay, so there is a great amount of knowledge from our ancestors. We need to research it and then share it with the world. But first of all, research it and learn it ourselves.
Right.
Can be useful in the modern.
Hmm.
Having said that, I'm not anti-West. I clarify that always. I am
Uh,
not anti-West. One should learn from all. Look, Goddess Saraswati can bless anyone. It's not necessarily that she'll bless only an Indian. No, she could bless an American. She could bless a British guy. She could bless a German. She could bless a Pakistani also.
Yeah.
So if she has blessed someone with knowledge, learn from that person. It's in our own selfish interest. So we should be open to learning from everyone.
This COVID pandemic, I mean, it's really put the world in crisis. It's not just one country. Like the whole world is in crisis now.
Global
Do you,
crisis.
yeah. So, do you think there are learnings from ancient times for us during this period? And is this crisis going to teach us a lot more about the future as well?
No, you're right that this is in a sense the first truly global crisis uh, that humanity has seen, and that's not because of the number of deaths. The number of deaths due to corona, deeply troubling as they are nowhere in the league of previous pandemics like the Spanish flu or the Justinian plague, etc. But because of instant and global communication, the entire almost everyone in the world has felt the impact of this, and the economic impact of it will last for many years. So in that sense, true, it is the first genuinely global uh, event in a way which is impacting everyone, right? And I think forget about the health or economic impact, which will be dramatic. I don't doubt that. But I think there will be massive societal impact of this because everyone is experiencing it. And I think society could go in one of two directions. Either many societies will rediscover the value of traditions. Because you will find that, I mean, like, in the UK, one has read so many cases of people who've died alone. Because in the West, so many people live completely alone, no relationship.
Correct.
Nothing. And there's so many people who died alone, people don't even know that they have died. Right? It's horrifying. Which is almost impossible in India. Someone or the other is around all the time. Even if you're living alone, your neighbors will keep, interfering. There's a downside to it as well. There's no, yeah. But you never actually, you don't have that extreme loneliness. So people might rediscover traditions and spirituality. That could be one route because the nearness of death makes you question these things. The other route could be, I've spoken of this a few times. The other route could be like the Roaring Twenties in America, right? Which came after the First World War and the Spanish flu, and like the reaction of the people was anyway marna hai, so might as well enjoy life, right? So the Roaring Twenties was an age of hedonism, drugs, everything. Society could go which one could be, but the normal, I suspect, will not happen. I think India will probably go deeper into spirituality and tradition. I think West will go.
Right. But during this time of lockdown, people are stuck at home with their families. They're not able to go out. But don't you think this is also a time to kind of rediscover yourself, rediscover a lot of things?
True, and that's what that path of rediscovering traditions and spirituality can take you to. Uh, and there is a value to that as well. One can't deny. And it can mean that an excess of traditions could mean that we lose the gains of liberalism that we have made, that the world has made over the last few decades. Which is where I think India can provide the answer, that you can have traditions and liberalism at the same time. I do want to clarify, don't judge liberalism by some of the extremist liberals one hears in the West. I know they can sound very silly, I know. But liberalism has been a force for good for many decades. And liberalism is too important, the value of liberalism, to let some extremist Western liberals, quote unquote liberals, destroy it. And I really think India can play a strong role in this, a balance between traditions and liberalism.
You've described India as a soft power, right, which can influence the world tremendously.
I said potential soft power.
Potential.
because India has the heritage to influence the world, and we have the scale. But till now, look, soft power only gets built when you actually have some basic hard power, right? You need some basic economic power, some basic military power. If you can't defend yourself, it's difficult to have soft power. If you don't have economic heft in the world, it's difficult to have soft power. And it's only post 1991, the reforms of 1991, that India has finally started rising in these states. So soft power will come naturally. The question is, what will our soft power be like? We learn from our ancestors, be a force for good, for liberalism, for democracy, which is why I think India's success is critically important. There is sadly, one sees that in the West also. There is a kind of a view going on that pandemics like crises like coronavirus, etc., can be better handled by authoritarian governments because they have they can stamp things down, and this is a very dangerous approach. Which is why the success of India is extremely important, because then India can be that proof that no chaotic, loud democracy can also deliver. And that's a very important statement for democracies and liberalism. I'm not saying that free market democracies are perfect. Of course, they're not. Countries in the West, India, Southeast Asia, I'm not saying they're perfect. But they're a hell of a lot better than authoritarian regimes. And often people who live in liberal democracies, you get so much into self-criticism that you don't realize the value of the country that you're living in, the value of the freedoms that you enjoy, which you will not get in an authoritarian country. Which is why I think India and India's success is extremely important for the world.
Right. And I think, we have been doing well, like you said, and hopefully, if we are able to manage this crisis, in our country well enough, then I think going forward, we could be on par with, the best of the countries and the superpowers, I think. So there are a lot of people asking questions about the books. Hello? Can you hear me? Hold on, guys. There's a little bit of glitch with the War of Lanka. He said 1.5 to 2 years, so you can probably expect it in 2022.
Sorry,
Hi. No, that's fine. I wasn't asking anything. I was just waiting for you to come back in. So there are fans who are asking whether you're going to write anything on the Mahabharata.
I will. I've left a clue at the end of the Shiva trilogy, and maybe after the Ramchandra series, I will write on my interpretation of the Mahabharata as well. Hope you guys like it.
Okay.
So, Ramchandra series, as you know, is a 5-book series. Only 3 have come out till now. I'm writing the 4th book right now. I should finish that hopefully in a few years. So once that is finished, then I'll probably start the Mahabharata.
Okay. And what about Krishna? They want to know whether you're going to do a series on Krishna.
Yeah, if there's Mahabharata, then Lord Krishna will be there, no?
So there's no separation, there's no separate Krishna series.
No, it will be a part of that story. Yeah.
Okay. One of the viewers is asking why your books take so long because they're eager to read it.
यार बच्चे की जान लोगे. Look, my books tend to be long. It takes a year and a half to write. I will try my best to write quicker. One of the things, I've started a writer center.
Okay.
One of my fears in life is I've too many book ideas, too many ideas that Lord Shiva has blessed me with. And I'll at the pace I write, I'll probably die before I finish all my stories, all the stories that I already have. So, and I don't want to do that because, then meri atma bhatakti rahegi. So I've started a writer center where, one hires writers. I write, the story summary for them, a 10,000 word story summary. Then they expand it into the first draft and then I work on it. so that
Okay.
the capacity can expand and I can get more books out. So I am trying to do something innovative. Let's see how it works.
Okay, okay. You know, you are a big Shiva Bhakt. That everybody knows, I think. But is there a lot of
Om Namah
inspiration for
Shivaya,
you?
Shiva, Rudra.
Yeah, Om Namah Shiva.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of inspiration from him? I mean, through prayers, through meditation, whatever form you connect spiritually.
Oh yeah, yeah. Look, Lord Shiva defines my life to a massive extent. I'm a very, very proud devotee of Lord Shiva, with complete respect to all other gods and goddesses and all other faiths that people may follow. But for me, he inspires me the greatest. Um, there's a lovely line, Yadyat karma karomi tava dakshinam shambho tava radhanam, that everything I do, Lord Shambhu, Lord Shiva, I do in your honor.
Hmm. Okay, that's a lovely way of putting it. Now, your books have also allowed youngsters to rediscover Indian mythology, right? Do you think it's important, especially given our population right now, the average age is below 30? So, do you think it's important for us to always understand our culture and mythology and traditions? Do you think it's important to hold on to that rather than just go completely west? Because now people are moving back towards reading Indian authors, Indian mythology, and they're loving it, and you've also said India has so many stories that we can tell, and why look for elsewhere. So do you think that Indian mythology is going to drive Indian publishing also going forward?
Mahatma Gandhi had said this wonderful thing that, I'm paraphrasing him, that keep the doors and windows open of my house and let the breeze of all over the world come in, but I refuse to be uprooted from my roots. Right?
Hmm.
So that's a wonderful balance to have. We can learn from the best of all cultures, but our roots have to be in our land, because that's what makes us strong. That's what gives us, food for the soul. Right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, um, and I strongly believe that there's something to be learned from all cultures, and we must learn. But our roots, our foundations have to be deeply Indian, have to be deeply strong. That's what makes us who we are, and that's how I live, and that's what I try and communicate through my books. Uh, Also, I think our traditions and our stories have always been popular. Just that their interpretation may change with every new generation. We may have a different form of presenting it, but the soul is still ancient. We are perhaps the only pre-Bronze Age culture that is alive till today. That is a living culture today.
Hmm. Hmm.
Whereas most other pre-Bronze Age cultures, which started their path through civilization along with us, but have died out, right?
Hmm.
Egypt, they've all died out. They're all museum pieces. Central America, they've all died out. We're still here.
Hmm.
Uh, a large part of it is, and there are various reasons for it, but a large part of it is also our deep attachment to our stories and our roots. We simply refuse to surrender.
Hmm.
No matter how many people attack us, both violently, intellectually, monetarily, in whatever way, we do not surrender our culture and our way of life. That's what makes
Right.
us immortal in some way. Right? What is immortal? I mean, it's no man or woman uh, can be immortal in this body, right?
Hmm.
Everything that is born will die. The
Hmm.
only way we can be immortal is really if we continue to live in the memory of others. Right? And our ancestors and our culture is immortal in that sense, because it continues. Our ancestors continue to live in us, in our memories. Therefore, they
Hmm.
are with some memories and our deep attachment to our culture, which keeps it alive.
Right. Your fans are, pointing out a very interesting thing where you said like you read 100 pages before you write a single page.
Yeah,
Um,
I've been doing research on. Yeah, I said that it's like a rough ratio. I read a lot, Rough ratio for every page I write, I read around 100 pages. Rough ratio.
Right. So, do you think every writer should adopt a similar kind of attitude towards their writing?
Who am I to pass judgment on other authors? It's just look, I like reading, right? So it's not that I read, for the purpose of doing research for my books. I just read because I like reading. I've been reading that, I've been a voracious reader from a very young age. I read at least 5-6 books a month, and I've been reading from the age of maybe 5 or 6. So I truly enjoy it. And fortunately, the genre that I write in, uh, research and reading helps a great deal, right? So, like, see, if an author is writing in the historical or fantasy fiction space, you have to, excuse me, you have to realize that we have to build the entire universe, the entire world for the reader, right? Unless say a story that is set in the modern day. If you set a murder mystery or a love story in the modern day, you don't have to build descriptions of what a coffee shop is like or what, because people
Right.
know already. You can just
Right.
take the story. But if you're writing historical or fantasy fiction, pe- people won't even have the concept of how do people travel, what the boats would be like. If if you're throwing a spear, what would the spear be like? How would it be designed? The center of gravity of the spear, that's where you should hold. What should the grip be like? How should you stand? Should you run and throw or should you stand and throw? What are the pluses, minuses of both? Should you flip the wrist at the end for greater speed to the spear? I had written one paragraph on Goddess Sati practicing with the spear in Sita, Warrior of Mithila. I would have read maybe 10, 15 pages, 20 pages perhaps, just for that one paragraph, right? Because remember, if you're a historical or fiction writer, you have to create the entire scene, but the world doesn't exist in the mind of the reader. Unlike in the modern, if you're writing something in the modern day, the world already exists in the mind of the reader. You can just jump straight into the story. So you
Right.
have to read a lot. You don't have a choice. If you're a historical or a fantasy fiction writer,
Right. So I want to ask you, in case your first book hadn't done well, what would you have done?
I would have still been a banker. I would have kept writing. No one would have read my books. I would have still kept writing, but I would have continued being a banker. No
Okay.
belonging in that job. Yeah, it's a boring job, but it pays well.
Okay. So you would have still continued to write, even though,
I
okay.
write for myself. I'm just lucky that that I can be a full-time writer, and make a living from it. But I would have continued writing. I'm lucky that others want to read it. No doubt.
Okay. What would be some of your tips for aspiring writers? Because there are a lot of youngsters who want to get into writing. There are now people doing self-publishing, So what would be some of the key things they should do or not do if they want to be successful at writing?
You know, I think one of the key things you should not do, and I meet many writers at LitFest, and I don't do too many events or interviews except around book launch times. But
Yeah.
at LitFest, I like to go because I get to meet my readers, and but I've been to a few, and at many LitFests, I meet people who come and talk to me and say, how do I become a bestseller writer? How do I become famous as a writer?
Yeah.
And I always tell them that is not the reason to get into writing. That should not be your reason to get into writing. If you want to make money, uh, there are many easier routes. Banking is a very good route to make legal. You don't have to do anything illegal to make good money. Uh, you know, the tech industry, for example. So there are various other routes you can take where you can make good money. Writing is a bit like it's a hit or miss. It's a high risk, high return. 99.5% of writers make very little money. Can't even pay their bills at the end of the month. But 0.5% writers make more money than they ever thought possible. Right? And those 0.5% writers, if you ask them, even they know when the game will stop. They can't predict, because who can tell which book or movie will do well? No one can predict it. So And becoming famous in today's day is the easiest. You go to social media, do something silly, and you will become famous. Right? So, if you want to be rich and famous, then you should not. Writing is not the approach for that. You could get it. You could be lucky and you could become rich and famous, but that's not the purpose to become a. That should not be your purpose to become a writer. Your purpose in becoming a writer should be that you wanna give voice to your soul, right? That you have something you want to say and you want to say it. Uh, and if the gods are kind and the book does well, fantastic. If it doesn't do well, no problem, because the purpose is to give voice to your soul. That is the way you should write. And that's the way I write even today. When I'm writing, I don't care at all about whether the book will succeed or not. If my book start flopping, I will go back to banking, or maybe I'll become a full-time diplomat. God knows. Right? I will keep writing because I write for my soul, uh, not to be rich and famous. That if that happens, it's a happy side effect. It should be your purpose. Right. That's one of the.
Okay. So there are a lot of writers also, now in India we have so many writers. But how does a person, who
Someone
wants
had
to
joked,
write, pick a genre?
as someone had joked once, India has
Huh.
more writers than readers.
That's true. We see quite a few of them now. But in terms of picking a genre, like you are passionate about, the historical aspect, the mythology. But in terms of picking a genre, how does it happen for a writer? What kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, the way I would say it is, look, I mean, uh, say you wanna cook paneer do pyaza, and say you don't have paneer with you, then you can't cook paneer do pyaza, right?
Right.
So, the genre that you want to write, and you should have some knowledge, some experience of that genre, right? So, if one wants to write in the space of our traditions, of our mythology, of our history, then one should have knowledge in that area. If you want to write, on love stories, for example, then you should have experience in that area. You should have had, I don't know, maybe loads of affairs and breakups. And those are things which give you experience in how to
Right.
write. If you have a broken heart, many of the best love story writers are those who had broken hearts, because they kind of pour their pain onto paper and it works.
Right.
So I don't know if an author will pick his genre or if the genre picks him or her. Whenever you have knowledge, whenever you have experience, whenever you have your interest, books will emerge in that genre. That's where perhaps it works.
Okay. In terms of writing, I also wanted to ask, like, how many drafts do you do? Like, you write the first draft, and are there rewrites, or it's just, is that process very important to get to the final book?
Each writer has its own, his or her own way. For me, it's pretty much the first draft.
Okay.
I'm extremely stubborn about the story. So I have massive arguments with my editors. I will not make changes to the book if they say make this change, it'll appeal to this segment. Make this change, it'll appeal to these critics. I don't care about that. For me, I genuinely believe the stories are a blessing of Lord Shiva, and unless I'm convinced of it, I don't rewrite. So
Right.
there are sections I've rewritten. I won't deny that. Of course, that has happened at times. But normally, most of my books, it's usually the first draft because I run with instinct. Um, of course, the editors improve the way I communicate my story. They could improve the language, or they could say this character is behaving out of character, things like that. But broadly, for most of my books, it's usually the first draft.
Okay. Because I think that's very important that the author is convinced of the story himself. If you're not convinced and then you're listening to other people and you're constantly changing it, then you might not end up with what you actually wanted to write, isn't it?
Exactly. And as I was saying earlier, an author has to realize the book is the voice of his or her soul, and you have to treat it with that much seriousness.
Yeah.
Like even now, I still can't explain where my stories come from. Right? And I've said it many times. I know some people laugh at it. I don't care. I've said it many times. I genuinely believe it's the blessings of Lord Shiva. My story. So if I start disrespecting that blessing by trying to write by committee, then the blessing will stop, right? That's the way I see it. And of course, my calls could be wrong, my instincts could be wrong. Of course, one accepts that, but they'll be mine, and it'll be mine.
Right.
That's how I write. So it's not that I'm not willing to listen to feedback, but only if it appeals to me and my instincts, then I will accept it. So it could be one person giving me feedback, but if it appeals to me, if it makes sense to me, I will accept it. It could be 10 million people telling me the same thing, but if it does not appeal to me, I will not accept it.
Right. Ajay Devgan is supposed to be starring in a movie adaptation of one of your books, isn't it?
No, Ajay is a friend, Ajay Devgan, and both he and Kajol read my books. There is a discussion with him, on one of the projects, but no, it has not been finalized as yet.
Okay.
So let's see where it goes. I'd love to obviously work with him. He's a wonderful human being, and also a very devout Shiv Bhakt.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
I think that's one of the places where he and I connect a lot. Yeah, so let's see how it works.
But are there other actors you'd like to see, take on some of the roles that you've written?
I've had some, I have some friends in the film industry, both in India and abroad. I'm not too much of a party animal, so it's not that I have a very wide circle of friends, but usually the friends I have are those who've read my books, and I've
Right.
engaged with them. I'd love to work with many of them. Let's see how things pan out.
Okay, you're keeping your cards close to your chest. Okay. So we know that the Ramchandra series is happening. You're working on it. Is there any other project that you're also working on, or any new initiative? You also spoke about the writers. Is it called the Writers Center?
Center. So I have
Yeah.
projects running in the Writers Center. So you'll once this thing stabilizes, you'll see many more books coming far more often. So that is of course one area of my life. I also have my Nehru Center work. So it's a privilege to work for Mother India, to push India's cultural narrative. In London and the larger West. So I'm working on many programs on that as well. I have a team out here
Okay.
who I work with. So life is
Okay.
good.
Yeah, somebody is asking about Karan Johar has the rights to the Shiva trilogy. What's happening with that?
He had the rights for the Shiva trilogy, but they have come back now. Karan is still a friend. We both talk very often, but those rights are back.
Okay, so that's not happening right now. So what are you looking forward to once things start normalizing? I think things in the UK are, of course, a little more normal than what it is in India. But what are you looking forward to now?
Yeah, UK was in a worse situation than India a month ago. So I guess hopefully we are past the peak and things will start stabilizing. And let's hope in India it doesn't get too serious.
Yeah.
But the vaccine is some time away. So at some level, I think we're just going to have to learn to live with Corona. What I'm looking forward to is getting back into the cultural scene in London. All of us have been stuck at home. Many things have moved online, but that obviously does not replace actual physical presence. Having said that, one can see in London, even if the lockdown is eased up, I don't see cultural events being being there on a normal basis for a few months at least. I think cultural events will be deemed essential.
Right.
And, so while people will be allowed to go out to work, which with some restrictions it has started already, I suspect cultural events will take a bit of time. But that one is looking forward to that because that impacts the job that I'm supposed to do out there, which is promote culture.
Okay, so somebody's asking whether you're going to do any masterclass for aspiring writers. There are a couple of people asking about that.
That's a good idea. Yeah, okay. Maybe I'm sure we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Okay, so Amishji says he is thinking about it and he's definitely going to figure that out. So masterclass for aspiring writers, I think, is a brilliant idea. Thank you so much, Amishji, for joining me on this interesting conversation. And we spoke a lot, not just about books, but I think more even in terms of life. And it was a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Lataji. I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for hosting me. And
Thank
I
you.
hope you and yours are well and safe. And we'll certainly try and catch up once again soon.
Definitely. Please do take care and have a wonderful time in London. And of course, I hope the Nehru Center does more brilliant stuff under your leadership. So looking forward to all that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.